Recording in progress.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and
Selamat
gentlemen.
pagi, selamat siang, dan selamat malam, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Selamat datang di webinar yang dilaksanakan oleh C20 Indonesia dalam webinar publik kelompok kerja lingkungan keadilan iklim dan transisi energi C20 dengan Clean, Affordable, dan Security Energy atau CASE untuk Asia Tenggara, dengan pertanyaan tentang gas sebagai bahan bakar transisi, pelajaran yang dipetik dari krisis energi saat ini. Saya juga akan memberikan sambutan kepada para panelis hari ini. Terima kasih telah bergabung di webinar ini. Webinar ini akan memiliki 3 tujuan. Yang pertama adalah untuk memahami lebih baik lagi kondisi geopolitik dari transisi energi. Yang kedua adalah untuk memahami implikasi dari konflik Rusia dan Ukraina, terutama terhadap Uni Eropa, dan mengambil pelajaran yang bisa dipetik dari strategi Uni Eropa untuk transisi energi bagi Indonesia. Dan yang terakhir adalah untuk mendiskusikan implikasi potensial untuk Indonesia dan juga strategi-strategi untuk menghindari situasi yang sama di masa depan. Sebelum kita berlanjut ke agenda utama dari webinar ini, mari kita mulai dengan membacakan aturan untuk event hari ini. Webinar ini akan dilakukan dengan format online melalui Zoom Meeting dan akan dilakukan dalam bahasa Inggris. Dan bagi partisipan yang berpartisipasi di Zoom, ada fitur penerjemahan dari Indonesia ke Inggris dan sebaliknya dari Inggris ke Indonesia. Untuk mengaktifkan fitur ini, klik logo global di Zoom bagian bawah kanan aplikasi Zoom Bapak Ibu. Dan jika Bapak Ibu menonton secara langsung di YouTube channel ISR Indonesia dan juga melalui Facebook, Bapak Ibu akan mendengar hanya audio originalnya saja. Yang kedua, silakan Bapak Ibu menamai ulang nama Zoom Bapak Ibu dengan nama Zoom, garis bawah, nama institusi. Yang ketiga, jika Bapak Ibu ingin bertanya kepada salah satu panelis selama webinar, Bapak Ibu bisa menulis pertanyaan Bapak Ibu di chat box dan berikan kepada siapa pertanyaan tersebut akan ditanyakan, atau mungkin bisa angkat tangan melalui fitur Zoom dan moderator nanti akan memberikan kesempatan kepada Bapak Ibu untuk bertanya selama sesi tanya jawab. Yang keempat, kami juga memberikan
And you can find the link in the chat box for the document. 5. All microphones should be muted throughout the webinar. You may only turn on your microphone if the moderator has invited you to deliver your question during the Q&A session. However, we also invite all participants to turn on their camera until the end of the webinar. 6. If you encounter any technical problems or have any questions on how to use Zoom and its features, please kindly send us a message in the chat box and our team may be able to assist you. 7. And lastly, all the presentation materials will be available in ISR website at www.isr.or.id. And before we continue to the first session, we would like to ask all participants to turn on their camera for a quick Zoom photo session. They will be moderated by our team. Are you guys ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Give your best smile. Okay, maybe one more time. 1, 2, 3. Done? Okay. Thank you, everyone. And moving on to our first agenda, I will now call my colleague, Mas Iqbal Ilham, that will moderate today's session. He will start the session by giving a brief introduction about CASE for Southeast Asia Project and the C20 Environment, Climate Justice, and Energy Transition Working Group. To Mas Iqbal, the time and floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Iqbal Ilham. I'm the project officer for the Clean, Affordable, and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia. I will be your moderator today in today's discussion titled The Question of Gas as Transition Fuel Lessons Learned from the Current Energy Crisis. I would like to remind you that this event is presented by the C20 Environment, Climate Justice, and Energy Transition Working Group in collaboration with the Clean, Affordable, and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the Clean, Affordable, and Secure Energy Project. We can share the slide for you. Okay, so Clean, Affordable, and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia is a project that having the background about we want people to understand that climate change is really haunting us. On the left side, we can see that from the Paris Agreement 2015, we all agree that we need to mitigate and we need to fight for the climate change. After that, unfortunately, we all gone through the COVID-19 pandemic. And after that, it's been discussed recently that the recession is coming in. But then we need to also understand that climate change is something even bigger than the recession itself. About the climate change, especially in the Southeast Asia, in the globe context as well, energy plays a really huge role in mitigating the climate change. For example, in Indonesia, we can see that energy mix in Indonesia is still dominated by the fossil fuels. 88.3% is fossil fuels comparing to 11.7% renewable energy. These are the background of CASE project, a project that is regionally operated in the 4 Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, with assistance from the Secretariat International and Regional Team. CASE also implemented in the country level. CASE is also implemented with the local consortium. In Indonesia, the consortium consisting of 2 organizations, GIZ GmbH in Indonesia and Institute for Essential Services Reform. While we have Kementerian PPN Bappenas, the Ministry of Development National Planning, the Directorate of Electricity, Telecommunication, and Informatics as our political partner. In Indonesian's activity, we have the support from our international partner, the Agora Energiewende and the New Climate Institute. These activities are open for collaboration with the Indonesian key stakeholders. In general, the clean, affordable, and secure energy have the objective. The narrative of energy sector in Southeast Asia is substantially shifted towards an evidence-based energy transition, with the objective to increase the political ambition towards the Paris Agreement, with 5 outputs of the project: research on clean energy, transparency, dialogue with non-energy sectors, technical assistance, and promotion and public discourse. Lastly, about CASE, the objective of CASE is this. We want people, whatever their background is, for this example, this girl, she have the major in philosophy, but she can talk about we need to invent a clean and renewable energy source. So we want to have energy transitions and renewable energy as a topic of discussion by every people in Southeast Asia. Next, I will introduce you to C20 Indonesia, the Civil 20 Working Group. I can present the presentation for you in a moment. Yep, so C20 is one of the engagement groups that will represent the voice of civil society organizations in the world. The engagement groups are independent and each one of the groups will represent different perspectives and interests. Each group will formulate policy recommendations for the leaders of G20 that will fill the gaps and improve the policy. C20 has 7 priority issues divided into 7 working groups led by organizations and experts. On the right side, you can see the C20 priority issues. First one, anti-corruption, education, digitalization, and global citizenship, environment, climate justice, and energy transition, gender equality, global health and vaccine access, SDGs, development and humanitarian, and the last is taxation and sustainable finance. On the next slide, I would like to introduce to you to our coordinator and international coordinator of the Environment and Climate Justice Energy Transition Working Group of the C20, as well to the sub-working group Forest, Land Use and Rights. On the next slide, the pillars and foundation of the C20 ECE Working Group is containing from 3 pillars: environment, climate, and energy, which have the foundation of climate justice and inclusive solidarity evidence-based advocacy as the C20 principles. Lastly, about the ECE Working Group priority issue on the next slide. The first one, they want to ensure inclusive climate actions and energy access by considering the right of vulnerable communities, fostering the implementation of green economic recovery in advancing climate resilience and mitigating climate change, encouraging appropriate carbon pricing mechanism to achieve net zero emission target, accelerating a just, decentralized, and measurable energy transition, protecting and restoring key vital ecosystems to build climate adaptation measure, conserving marine and coastal ecosystem to promote healthy and resilient marine environment, and to improve resource efficiency and waste management system to reduce plastic litter. Ladies and gentlemen, so the world is going through a major energy crisis as a result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. At the same time, the next few years are critical for our action in fighting the climate change, our last chances to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature limit. So far, we witness how governments around the world have failed to seize their chance to rearrange their energy supplies away from fossil fuels. Instead, a global rush for new fossil gas production, pipelines, and LNG facilities are currently underway around the globe. This surely contradicts with the findings and studies based on the scientifically proven methods. For example, the IPCC report 15, which stated that fossil gas power generation needs to be effectively phased out by 2045 in all regions in the world. Without needing a profound intelligence, we all can foresee that this phenomenon could lead into another dispute in the near future, another subject of interesting and lively discussion around the energy transition discussion for some time in the future. Today, we're going to understand better about this question around the natural gas and how to survive this energy crisis from the experts and organizations that have had objectively analyzed, studied, and mastered the topic. Without further ado, please let me introduce you to 2 of the presenters today. We have Ms. Anna Chapman, Climate and Energy Policy Analyst in the Climate Analytics, which will present to you Fossil Gas, A Bridge to Nowhere by Climate Analytics. And next after Anna, we will have Mia Moisio, Climate Policy Analyst in the New Climate Institute, that will present Global Reaction to Energy Crisis, Risk Zero Carbon Transition. Without further ado, to Ms. Anna Chapman, time is yours to present the study. Thank you.
Thank you. Just share my screen. All right, just to confirm, you can see my screen there?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, thanks a lot, Iqbal. So my presentation is on fossil gas phase-out requirements in a 1.5 degree world. So this presentation is based on 2 climate analytics reports, Why Gas is the New Coal, and more recently, Fossil Gas, A Bridge to Nowhere. So why fossil gas? So while there is increasing pressure on coal phase-out, fossil gas has largely flown under the radar. There are an increasing number of companies and governments looking to gas in their transition to net zero emissions. So there's ongoing narratives supporting the role of fossil gas. And for example, you would have likely heard claims that gas is a cleaner alternative compared to coal, which is very misguided when you compare renewable energy. And you would also hear arguments for gas peaker power plants in high penetration variable renewable energy systems, whereas non-fossil fuel alternatives also exist. So our reports show fossil gas is neither clean nor is it a bridging fuel. Fossil gas has contributed to nearly 50% of growth in global fossil CO2 emissions over the past few years. And a continued role for fossil gas, as foreseen in the International Energy Agency or IEA stated policy scenario, is inconsistent with pathway towards 1.5 degrees. So it's important for the world to recognize that gas is as important a fossil fuel to phase out as coal. So gas is the new coal. And the war in Ukraine and the ongoing global energy crisis have made it clear that a clean energy transition is also a security matter. To start, we can have a look at the historical trend of fossil gas in power generation globally. So the IEA data shows between 2000 and 2019, electricity generation from fossil gas increased at a rate of 4% per year. So from 2,774 to 6,316 terawatt hours. So then where are we heading? The IEA stated policy scenario sees a slower rate of growth between 2019 to 2040, with fossil gas generation reaching 8,300 terawatt hours. And so this scenario is represented by the red line. And BP's business as usual scenario sees a more rapid rate of growth between 2019 and 2040. And this scenario is represented here by the green yellowish line. But neither of these scenarios are consistent with the Paris Agreement 1.5 goal. In a 1.5 degree compatible scenario, we see a fossil gas phase out. So in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC special report, in the pathway that meets sustainability criteria, we see that unabated fossil gas electricity generation falls below 10% of total electricity generation before 2035 and falls below 5% of total electricity generation before 2040. So is effectively phased out in all world regions by 2045. Given the dramatic plummet in the costs of renewable energy, investment in new fossil gas generation in the 2020s carries the risk of creating stranded assets. So here in the table, we can see fossil gas is phased out shortly after coal. So the fossil gas phase-out dates occur at most 5 to 10 years after the coal phase-out date in both developed and developing economies. So for example, in non-OECD Asia, the coal phase-out date is 2035, and the gas phase-out date is shortly after in 2040. And for developed countries, it's much sooner. This shows fossil gas can't have a role as a transition fuel in the power sector. And pathways from the IPCC 6 assessment report, selected using the same sustainability constraints, shows an even earlier phase-out date by 2040. So gas here is represented by the blue, whereas the grey represents coal. And you can see both coal and gas peak on the graph, showing that the phase-out needs to start immediately. A rapid phase-out of fossil fuels from the power sector is becoming really more urgent due to the rising emissions and more feasible due to the lower cost of renewables and storage. So our reports focus on fossil gas power generation without carbon capture and storage, or CCS. CCS has a very limited role in the power sector in the scenarios we assess. The small role is unlikely to be necessary given the range of cost-effective alternatives for providing dispatchable low-carbon power, such as hydrogen turbines, geothermal. So challenges for fossil gas and CCS include the energy penalty of CCS, the high marginal costs of fossil gas, and incomplete carbon capture methane emissions during production and transport. IEA scenarios are often criticized for the conservative assumptions over the cost and availability of zero carbon alternatives. So the graph here shows scenarios published from 2016 to 2021. And successive IEA scenarios show steeper declines in fossil gas power. So represented in the dark blue line you can see here, the IEA net zero scenario shows a much steeper fall in fossil gas power than previous IEA sustainable development scenarios, and broadly in line with the IPCC 1.5 scenarios. Renewables and storage are increasingly cost-effective alternative to gas, and the deployment of renewables and storage increases dramatically over this decade and the next in 1.5 compatible pathways. So solar and PV and wind capacity increase around 5-fold between 2020 and 2030 in the IEA net zero scenario. And dramatic cost reductions in renewable energy and storage means these are expected to continue to increase in cost effectiveness. So what about gas and primary energy? Scenarios show fossil gas and primary energy should already have peaked and be declining globally. Gas and primary energy is represented in the graph in red here, and gas electricity is represented in the yellow. So the solid line is the IPCC 1.5 pathway, and the dotted line is the IEA net zero pathway. Both the IEA and IPCC 1.5 scenarios show declines in total fossil gas consumption. And the slower decline in the IEA net zero scenario reflects more conservative assumptions on the availability of low carbon alternatives. So for important context, achieving a rapid fossil fuel exit in many developing countries will require financial, technical, and depending on the circumstances, transitional support from the developed countries. And the legal and ethical basis of this stems from the principles of common but differentiated responsibility and capability that underpins the climate regime and is encoded in the Paris Agreement. And so gas phase-out dates need to be considered in the context of sustainable development objectives and risks. So the risk of stranding of infrastructure and other assets in the face of continually declining costs of renewables and storage and the challenges posed by volatile fossil fuel prices that we can see right now. The global scenarios we've assessed tend to show slower transitions than bottom-up models and are often criticized for using conservative cost assumptions of renewable energy. So the key takeaways from our reports and from this presentation would be that fossil gas is not a transition fuel. The latest scenarios show a global phase out by around 2040, not long after coal. This analysis didn't take into account recent gas price increases and volatility, which highlights the increase in urgency of a transition to renewables now more than ever. A rapid phase out of fossil gas from the power sector is becoming both urgent due to rising emissions and the security concerns at present, and more feasible due to the falling costs of renewable storage. And thank you very much for listening. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation. So that I have highlighted from Anna's presentation that the proponents of gas claim that it is cleaner compared to coal, but it is not compared to renewable energy. That's one thing that we need to highlight and underline. The next one, from your study, that gas will be phased out soon after coal. I see on the table, in several regions, even it is needed to be phased out in the same year. As well as fossil gas had a high marginal cost, so it required to rapid phase out fossil fuel gas. And as a last statement, fossil gas is not a transition fuel. Thank you so much, Anna, for your presentation. For the next presentation, I would like to welcome Mia Moisio. Miss Mia, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Yeah, thank you, Mia, for joining the session. So Mia, presenting the global reaction to energy crisis, risk zero carbon transition. I would like to welcome you, and the time is yours for the next 10 minutes. Please, Mia.
Thank you very much. And I'm now sharing my screen. I hope you can all see my presentation. So yes, indeed, I will be following up a bit on what Anna already presented about the role of fossil gas, and specifically I'll be presenting findings from a report that we recently published in June as part of the Climate Action Tracker Consortium on the energy crisis and the role of gas there specifically. And before I start, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the Climate Action Tracker Consortium. So we analyze climate action in over 40 countries in the world. And as part of that, we rate climate action in those countries. And once a year, we come up with the temperature estimates. You can see here on the left our temperature chart, where we estimate the impact also of NDCs and current policies on global warming. And I would like to start with this, our temperature estimates actually. So what we're seeing already now is that the world is heading currently with policies that governments have implemented to a catastrophic 2.7 degrees of warming by the end of the century. So clearly this highlights the urgency to come up with more ambitious action. And if what we're seeing at the moment, this rush to build new gas infrastructure and new fossil fuels to respond to the energy crisis, clearly this temperature estimate would even increase. This is under currently implemented policies. Then, of course, if you look at the promises that countries have made, so the targets that are in place, then we get to more optimistic scenarios. Our most optimistic scenarios gets to 1.8 degrees of warming, but even that is still far away from the 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement. So there's still a lot more to be done, and more ambitious policies need to be implemented urgently. And so here, just a couple of words on fossil gas, and here I will not repeat much. Anna gave a very good introduction on that. So indeed, global gas demand under 1.5 degree compatible scenarios should already be declining, and there's only a very minimal role of gas going to 2040 and 2050, as Anna just presented. And one thing I also want to highlight is that the International Energy Agency has found that already from now on, there should be no oil and gas production already. And this is contrary to what we're seeing in many parts of the world, with oil and gas producers announcing more investments into oil and gas production. And here also, to give some context, and I also mentioned some of this, it's important to see that gas is, it's not a sustainable solution to meet the climate crisis, but it is also not a cost-effective solution for the energy transition. So here I'm just giving some findings from other work. So very recently, the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, published a study that showed that $55 billion could be saved globally will be saved globally in 2022, thanks to the renewable energy capacity added in 2021 alone. And here on the left, you can see that chart displayed for different G20 countries, and we see China is leading this with around $30 billion in savings, but there are also major savings that will happen in countries like Brazil, India, the UK, and other G20 members. And when looking at the costs of gas in Europe, particularly, this is the chart that you can see here on the right. You can see that fossil gas without CCS and with CCS is 2 to 4 times higher already than renewable energy. So the green bars that you can see here on the left. And this is not even accounting for some of the dramatic increases that we have seen in the past few weeks in gas prices in Europe particularly, but also globally. So here I want to just go back a little bit to the study that we published as part of the Climate Action Tracker and some of the global reactions to the current energy crisis and what we recommend governments should and should not do to respond to it. And here indeed the current energy crisis was sparked as with the invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and as a response, several countries, particularly in Europe, but also elsewhere, decided to partially or completely stop energy imports from Russia. And here, as a context, why is this so? Why is the scale so big? Russia was the first fossil gas exporter in 2020, representing 25% of global exports. And it was also the third largest oil exporter. So clearly it's a major part of energy that is now needs to be reshuffled, and exports and imports that need to be rethought. And we came up with a general list of do's and don'ts. I can come back to that in a minute, but essentially what we are indeed seeing is that there is a massive rush, particularly in Europe, but also in other countries that imported gas from Russia, to build new gas import infrastructure. And then in exporting countries, we're seeing countries building new export facilities and also going for new production. And if we really see this development continuing, then this will lock the world into irreversible warming or risk creating a mass of stranded assets. And here, according to the IPCC, if we're to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, we're already looking at 1 to 4 trillion of stranded assets by 2050. And this number would only increase if all of the planned fossil gas plants would come online. And I like what you had in the beginning, these different waves of crisis. So, we had COVID and the economic crisis. Now we also have the much larger climate crisis. And we're seeing that already with the COVID pandemic, governments fail to actually address, and re-gear the large amount of investments to cleaner alternatives. So here we have an opportunity in this moment where many governments, many countries are rethinking their energy systems. We have an opportunity to not make the same mistake again. And instead of investing in more fossil fuels, we have an opportunity to invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy to meet also the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And here you can see we had a broad set of do's and don'ts. I mean, the main ones indeed are to not build new fossil fuel infrastructure, particularly not the kind of infrastructure that will lock countries into, for the next decades into a high carbon pathway, but instead to build renewables and to maximize energy efficiency also. And as I mentioned, now we're really seeing, so it's really the scale of this this wave of new gas investment announcements is huge. And what we've observed is that nearly all the major gas exporters are also have announced that they are planning to increase production and export. So this includes, just a few of the major examples: the USA, Canada, Algeria, Qatar, Norway, Australia, the UAE, Algeria, Egypt, but also many other fossil gas producers. We have seen, luckily, also some positive developments on renewable energy, with, for example, the European Union proposing to increase their renewable energy target from 40% in primary energy to 45% in 2030. And just recently, we also had some positive news from the US with the Inflation Reduction Act passing and the major tax credits for renewables there, and other countries also around the world announcing increased investments in renewables. But this is still not enough. And clearly, as I mentioned, we should already be phasing out new investments into fossil gas and oil production. So the developments that we're seeing are broadly not in line with what needs to happen under 1.5 compatible pathway. In zooming into Europe specifically, if we look at the import plans that countries have announced to date, we see that already with the announced plans of new LNG import terminals, we already meet what was previously imported from Russia. So there's currently around 150 BCM of planned new LNG capacity in the works, and this is even excluding additional imports via pipeline that are also happening. So, and to give you a point of comparison, in 2021, the EU imported 155 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia. And one important thing to mention here also is that many of these new LNG terminals, they're long-term infrastructure projects. Most of them won't actually be ready to mitigate the current crisis. So in Europe, going into the coming winter, there is indeed a risk that there will not be sufficient gas. But here also the solution, given that many of these gas infrastructure projects take a lot of time to be built, over the next few months, the main way to address the energy crisis is by energy efficiency and energy saving measures. And the European Union members recently agreed to voluntarily reduce gas demand by 15%. So this is indeed a good step forward on that. And we see actually also from studies, we see that Europe would not need to invest in any new gas pipelines or onshore LNG projects, given, if a few things happen. And this needs to be a very rapid acceleration in renewable energy deployment. We need to also maximize energy efficiency measures across all sectors, buildings and industry in particular. And there needs to be an accelerated electrification in the industry sector. And with this, there will be a short-term need for additional imports of gas via pipeline or floating terminals, LNG terminals, but it needs to be clear that this is only a temporary solution, and that, some of this additional imports will in the medium to long term be replaced with renewable energy alternatives. And to sum up a bit, and to conclude this, I just want to say that indeed we've seen the current energy crisis was caused by, in Europe particularly, with a very high reliance on imported fossil fuels. So clearly the way forward is not to increase dependencies on fossil fuels from elsewhere, but it is becoming increasingly clear that there needs to be increased emphasis on energy security and clean domestic sources of energy like renewable energy. And with these messages from what's happening on the energy crisis and in Europe, I would like to thank you everyone for your attention, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mia, for your presentation. It's actually really, really interesting that from the study, we know that gas is not a sustainable option for long-term decarbonization, and it's not also a cost-effective solution. So then it looks a bit more of we crisis ourselves deeper and deeper, more and more each day. This, as a response to the energy crisis, the development of the gas infrastructure is a reaction to the inability importing from Russia as the gas exporter. So we can here underline that it's not energy crisis, but it's fossil energy crisis, and we need to detach ourselves from fossil as much as we can. And as well, it won't be ready for the current crisis anyway. So it's not a really solution for us. It's interesting from your presentation, Mia. Thank you so much for the presentation and the study. We would like to continue to the discussion. Let me introduce you to our panelists today. We have with us Dr. Insinyur Widiawan Prawira Atmaja. He is the senior lecturer from School of Business and Management Institute Teknologi Bandung. He's the former Indonesian governor for OPEC, Pak Wawan. We also have Eugene Kim, Ginny, member of C20 ECEWG from the Solutions for Our Climate, Ginny. And then we also have Dr. Radendra Ditya Yuda Wiranegara, senior researcher from the Institute for Essential Services Reform. And we have Dr. Herman Daniel Ibrahim, member of the National Energy Council of Republic Indonesia, or DEN. So without further ado, I have a question to all the panelists. The first question is, the studies presented stated that in general, governments have largely failed to seize their opportunity to rearrange their energy supply away from fossil fuels. Instead, many countries seize that the development of gas in the perspective to replace gas supply from Russia could be helpful for them. What is your opinion about this? And I would like to ask Pak Wawan to answer first.
Okay, perhaps I have a few slides to show, especially when it affects the condition of Indonesia whenever it's appropriate. But perhaps responding to your questions, this is I mean, I have no disagreement whatsoever with the presentations of Anna and Mia. They are all great presentations, and in ideal case, that should be the one that we should pursue. But in the reality, we hit some of the difficulties, all of the challenges, especially when it's faced by Indonesia. The intent is there, but when the reality hits, it's something to do with. I mean, we just have to admit that we have to be very honest that to be consistent, what we said that we want to do is rather difficult, especially in the situation of the current energy crisis right now. I like to, my background is economics, so it's a specialty in energy and environment. So to me, without the organizations or the companies who are going to do the things that you are saying that it should be done that way, it's not going to happen, especially in Indonesia. Indonesia, I think the major players are state-owned enterprises. All of them are still now relying a lot on fossil fuels, most notably coal, and also oil and gas. So now, to me, it is a matter of how the government should actually giving incentives or disincentives to get this thing, as you said, it needs to be done. And in Indonesia, this is rather tricky right now, especially when you mixed it with the political agenda in 2024. There will be elections. And then we should see which candidate is going to push for the green agenda versus the other, and who's going to vote for them, right? I think the questions here is that the infrastructure that we have is really based on fossil fuels. And then the official energy transition agenda is, yes, going to accelerating the renewable, but that would be still very small amount, and gas ought to play a big role, if we are to have no more coal power generations, additions, or even phase down of the coal power generations. Now, the problem is that this infrastructure is rather difficult. We have, for example, just give you a flavor, we have a lot of gas turbines and also gas engines, power generations, who are currently still being fed by oil, not even with gas. Even we do have the gas, but if without the infrastructure, is gas not going to be there? Now, the question is on the scale, right? I mean, we are accustomed, our state electricity accustomed to add capacity at the range of 600 to 1,000 megawatt. So 1 gigawatt each. And then when you add gas, it's much smaller than that. And if you add renewable, it's much, much smaller than that. So you could now can imagine that doing what Anna and Mia prescribe is rather going to be very, very difficult without the seriousness of the government to do it. Now, to add even the problem is that we are still subsidizing the fossil fuels. So we know that coal is $400 now, but the state of electricity is paying only 70. Gas for JKM is $53 per million BTU. PLN is still paying $7. So with that kind of reality, I think the companies is not incentivized to do what it should be, which is actually relying more on renewables. And if it is intermittence, is going to be supplemented by storage rather than, trying to go with into the gas side, even though officially Indonesia says that most of the coal will be replaced by gas, whether in the power generation or also the use of fuels in industry. So it is very difficult. And then we understand the intent is there and we have to start now, but I don't think we are doing what we are saying, what we are doing, even though the price is still actually being subsidized.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Wawan, for your reaction to that question. It's very interesting that when reality hits, somehow it's still difficult for us, especially when the businesses and the local energy system in Indonesia are really reliant on the fossil fuel infrastructure. You said that we have gas turbine and we have gas engines, but up until now, we don't fuel them with gas. We still fuel them with the oil. Okay, Pak Wawan. Pak Wawan, you mentioned that you have a presentation. Maybe you can share them with us for the next 2-3 minutes before we go to the other panel.
I was going to use that as a background of what I'm saying, but I think no more. But I can share it at the chat.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Wawan. Maybe we can go further to Dr. Aditya. Dr. Aditya, what do you think about the condition?
Yes, thank you, Iqbal, for the time given to me. Yeah, I think I agree to what Anna and Mia shared in the presentation, and also I agree with the situation as laid out by Dr. Widjawan on the difficulty on transitioning to away from the fossil fuel, but I think the situation needs to be seen differently. I think, and in the report written by Climate Action Tracker by Mia, there's this interesting aspect on the behavior change, and which needs to be supported, I guess. And in this kind of crisis, I think that is one of the thing that we need to be focusing. So behavioral change from the users of the energy needs to be considered, because so far in the Indonesian case, the subsidies are largely for the consumption of fuel for transportation, and with the energy crisis, this put burdens to the government budget, and I think users like us needs to change our behavior by using more public transport, or by switching to use a non-engine transportation like bicycle or something like that. So I think that's my comments on that, on your question, Iqbal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Radit, for your answer about that. Yeah, actually, it's interesting that we see that the fossil fuel subsidy is more onto the transport and the end consumer level, or for the public, right? But it is still heavily on fossil fuels such as gas and gasoline, like what Pa Widjawan just mentioned. Maybe I want to also invite Ginny from the Solutions for Our Climate. Ginny, what do you think about this condition? How this would affect people, for example? How would they see this inconsistency of commitment towards energy transition? What do you think?
Yeah, happy to be here. So, inconsistency, I think the narrative around gas that's been pushed in Korea is that it's a cleaner alternative fuel. So it's been very much tied to the idea of energy transition, which definitely is a confusing message for the public to digest, as more and more environmental activists are saying that LNG is in fact not an appropriate alternative. And I also would like to add on that this is an issue that requires a lot of political will and leadership in Korea. I think a lot of the issues we're facing are similar to what Indonesia is going through. Our power market structure is rather rigid, and our majority state-owned utility is very reliant on coal and gas, and it's been that way for a while now. And the market structure is it is not an even playing field for renewable generators to easily enter. And so I think definitely there needs to be more clear narrative around what gas really is, which is that it is just another fossil fuel. And the market structure needs to foster more renewables through, for example, removing subsidies for fossil fuel generators, and not defining gas as a green energy source in our taxonomy, which allows more green finance to be diverted away from renewables into gas. And yeah, overall, just more climate leadership from our government. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yep, Ginny, thank you so much for that reaction to my question. Actually, yeah, that is the underline, the leadership of the climate action. It's quite important in this period of energy crisis, as well as facing for the energy transition. Maybe going to Dr. Herman Darnell. Actually, the question is, going forward to facing the energy crisis, and then we, as the current global trend is doing, we develop the gas. Learning from the coal phase out experience, at least in Indonesia, which required quite some time to finally committed in early retirement of coal-fired power plants. How is the nature of gas production? I mean, will this require a long-term contract of operation as well, like the CFPPs? And how will this cause near future problems like early retirement for the facilities as well and stranded assets? What's your opinion from the point of view on this matter? Dr. Herman Darrell, please. Dr. Herman Darrell, sorry, we couldn't hear your voice. Maybe you're still muted.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I talked, but I didn't unmute, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation of Anna and Mia. I share it, but I think most of your points valid for the developed countries, such as OECD countries. But for the developing countries like Indonesia, maybe not all of the points are suitable. Yeah. Let's see first. In Indonesia, we target the 23% of renewable, and we can only move within almost 15 years from 9 to 11. Yeah, 9% renewable to 11% renewable, and the target is 23%. So the target like net zero emission, maybe we have to see our experience. We have to learn from our experience that it's hard to move. And although beside that, energy is still subsidized. And this year is highly subsidized. And I think for Indonesia, the first move is from subsidized energy to non-subsidized energy. And then after that, especially this subsidized because of the fossil energy. from non-subsidized energy, we move to tax energy. This incentive the fossil energy. And we continue with decarbonization. So talking about coal phase out, for instance, the difference between Indonesia and developed countries, we still have high demand growth. So for instance, between 20 to 2030, we need around 300 terawatt hours to be added to our yearly consumption. Today, our yearly consumption is around 300 terawatt hour, but in our plan to improve our economy, to increase also the wealthy, we need to provide another additional 300 terawatt hour, so will be 600 terawatt hour by 2030. So with additional growth of demand, our situation is different. In developed countries, they are all almost zero growth. So they are facing only how to make it clean, and then can do the coal phase out, maybe also gas phase out. But for us, we need more energy, and how to fulfill this with 100% renewable. And I don't see that we can do it with 100% renewable. So if we cannot do 100% renewable for the additional consumption, how can we phase out the coal and the gas? And that's the first issue, yeah. So in the commitment for the coal phase out and also gas phase out, the target is set more than based on ambition rather than based on reality, yeah. And if we see also in the world, the total emission from energy still increased, yeah, from 1990 to 2020, increased from 20 gigaton to more than 35 gigaton. So meaning worldwide, the use of fossil energy still high growth. And then this has to be stopped. So I think there is a difference between the view of the maybe environmentalists with the energy people. Like Dr. Widiawan said, in Indonesia, this depends on the state-owned enterprise who provide the energy. And at this time, although we have already committed, yeah, to make the net zero emission by 2060, just to grow the rooftop, for instance, we still cannot go, yeah, for the rooftop. And without hydro, without geothermal, we rely on the solar energy mainly. We don't have much resource of the wind energy. So with the solar energy, we will need maybe hundreds gigawatt of solar installed capacity, but so far we haven't moved. So far only we have 200 megawatt. Yeah. So this too far from our target, I think. Yeah. So what I suggest for Indonesia, not I suggest, but what I think will happen for Indonesia, we still need gas. Yeah. We still need gas as the part of the transition from coal to gas. And the question also, if all countries requiring gas, maybe gas price will also one of the issue. Gas price will increase, yeah, because of the high demand. So we need to rethink again for Indonesia. If we use gas, we build the infrastructure, but after we build the infrastructure, we will have later the gas price is increased, then it will be the issue for Indonesia. Maybe like a crisis also will happen in Indonesia. So talking about the energy transition, so there's the decarbonization is important, but the security is more important than the clean, yeah, especially for the low middle income countries, because if we don't have the energy security, how can we develop our economy? I think for your question, that's the main point that I can say. Even to phase out coal, yeah, if I talk based on my experience, my background is from power company, and I did also the electricity planning. It's still hard to have the, to provide, to fulfill our demand without coal. But if we commit to phase out coal, we will try. But the question, what's the replacement of the coal? If it is not gas, what else? Nuclear. Nuclear is expensive. If we do with solar energy, we need storage, and with storage still expensive. So that's the situation. Another thing that you then have to forget, Indonesia is an archipelago, and the situation in Java and outside Java is very different. Yeah, we still have a region with 100% diesel. Yeah, small region in the east, 100% diesel. Not gas, diesel oil, yeah, 100%. Then we have to do this transition, the whole country. And in Java, the issue is different. Java is almost 80% of our energy demand is in Java. But the energy, primary energy is from outside Java. This time we import coal, we bring coal from outside Java to Java. So if we stop coal in Java, what's the source of energy? We have hydro and geothermal, but that's only enough for 40 terawatt hour. No more, yeah, 40 terawatt hours maximum. And this time in Java, we consume almost 150, 160 terawatt hour. So if we replace this coal and gas in Java, no more coal, no more gas, we have only 40 terawatt hour hydro and geothermal. So you think, how can we fill the gap with solar energy? I don't have the answer. Even I don't have the answer. Maybe we have to come back to coal, yeah, if we have to provide the security. That's what I can share for the moment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Herman Daniel, for that answer. Okay. It's interesting that you said that there is this gap and there is a potential of crisis, potential crisis 2.0 maybe faced by Indonesia if we undergo with the gas for this strategy. But I want to ask to Dr. Aditya and Jenny, on the perspective of think tanks organization, seeing this, what just Dr. Herman Daniel told us, that there is this gap in the low middle income countries. If we use the renewables, like 100% renewables, there is this gap. There is also a gap between, for example, in Indonesian context, Java Island and the outside Java, like a very centralized and very popularized place, and not very popularized and quite rural places. On the perspective of think tanks, seeing this slow pace of the realization of energy transition, plus this new involvement of gas in the global energy mix, plus that gap, do you think net zero emission targets 2045, for example, is it still achievable in the next 15 and 25 years? Maybe Dr. Aditya, you can ask. Yeah, you can answer.
Okay, so if you ask me if it's still achievable in the next 15 or 25 years, I mean, with the current plan that we can see from the RUPTL, from PLN, I see that there's still a number of projects, fossil fuel based projects in the power generation that will still be added into Indonesia's power systems for the next 10 years. And to break that down, the fossil fuel project that I mentioned earlier, around 30.8 gigawatts will be coal power plants, and there will be around 5.8 gigawatts of gas power plants, and that are expected to come online in the next 10 years. This is based on PLN's business electricity supply plan. And if you ask me whether the target of the net zero emissions will be will still be achievable in the next 15 or 25 years if there's no clear plan with the planning on the retirement of the 9.2 gigawatts and further plan on what to do with these new power plants in the pipeline. I think it would be, I have to say this pessimistically, it would be unlikely to be achievable. So unless the government has put a real plan and on how to incentivize or disincentivize this kind of incentivize the renewable development or disincentivize the continued development of the fossil fuel project. So I think that would be the answer that I can give you for now, Iqbal.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adit. Maybe going to Ms. Jinikim?
Yeah, I'll just add on. So I am speaking from a Korean perspective, but I think for us to achieve net zero, there definitely has to be stronger leadership from advanced economies like Korea, which is really not stepping up. Instead of reducing gas, it seems like we're consistently expanding gas infrastructure, especially as an import country. We are pouring in money into expensive gas infrastructure like terminals and storage facilities, which are all capital that can go into expanding renewables. And it could definitely prolong our gas phase out year, which is already very slow. According to the IEA, which recommends electricity sector decarbonization by 2035 for advanced economies. But Korea is currently still planning on using gas or expanding gas by 2035. And even if we look at our carbon neutrality plan, it's 0% for unabated LNG by 2050, which does not include abated gas. So these are all very concerning trends for Korea. So by climate leadership, I mean faster phase out in countries, in our own countries, and then also added to that, not creating carbon lock-in in other countries. I'm not sure if you know, but South Korea is the largest public financier of overseas oil and gas. And so stop pouring all of that public money into overseas gas projects and start using that money to support countries in Southeast Asia through knowledge exchange, capital investment. The IEA recommended that Southeast Asian nations need about $190 billion annually by 2030 to unlock its renewable potential. And what is South Korea doing if it's not supporting that and instead trying to expand fossil fuel such as gas? So I think that's maybe more an idealistic outlook, but I think hopefully we can try to achieve net zero emissions through better support amongst countries. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ginny, for that answer. We quite discussing about the incentivize and disincentivize the source of energy. It is from the many scientific reports, it is stated that the cost of electricity from the renewables are comparably cheaper than fossil fuels. But then here in this discussion, we understand that to unlock all the potentials of the renewables, it requires a lot of money still. Question to Dr. Widiawan and to Dr. Herman Darnell. Why don't Indonesian government simply, for example, in this context, Indonesia, disincentivize fossil fuel and then start to incentivize renewable energy? What do you think is the the reason behind this very slow policy? Maybe Dr. Widiawan, you want to answer.
Okay. I'm involved in the modeling exercise done by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, and we all go to the targeted net zero emission by 2060, right? So it's all going to happen on paper. And then with a lot of assumptions, right? Then some of the assumptions may actually seem to be good. For example, efficiency gains, but the amount that we pay for energy, it's becoming a question for somebody like me, whether it's going to be incentivized to do the efficiency gain. And then we also relying much on CCS, and I think the 2 presenters earlier mentioned about CCS, which it will probably difficult, especially with the cost is going to come with that. And we also have some nuclear and the new technologies such as hydrogen and so on and so forth. So I think part of these things is going to cost money, just like you said, Pak Iqbal. And then we have the numbers, but again, it really depends on the assumption. Now, the assumption that we have is that it's going to happen somehow with the support of the developed countries. Herman Daniel earlier mentioned about whether it's applicable to developing countries. One of the issues that the Ministry of Energy and Resources of Indonesia is stating that, or almost admitting, without the support from the developed countries, it is really going to be very, very difficult, right? And then I think it is really, yes, Indonesia has a difficult situation, but I think
Hello?
Thank you, Dr. Widiawan. Maybe on to you, Dr. Herman Darrell.
Yeah, I understand the question. I think the issue that is more on political issues on this disincentive of the fossil. So far, our people has already enjoyed the subsidized electricity, subsidized petrol, and at this time, say like in Europe, I drive car here, and in Europe, 35,000 rupiah per liter, but we still sell in Indonesia Pertalite of 7,050. 750, yeah. So this gap, maybe the gap more than 10,000, and how much the consumption every day. What I would suggest to the climate activists, and also to the COP, maybe in the COP, the leaders need to agree to remove the subsidy of fossil as one of the pledge. So far, there is no pledge to remove the subsidy of the fossil. I talked this to my colleagues from the Ministry of Environment who participate in the COP. I participate as observer, but I didn't participate as a negotiator. But this very important. So if COP pledge, one of the pledge is to remove the subsidy of fossil, the leaders in developing country will have the support of the power. Oh, I do this because we commit in the world. But without this, maybe the leader of developing countries still not confident enough, to remove the subsidy, because this will have the political impact. Maybe it will shift the power to other if they apply the tax. If they remove subsidy and apply the tax. So far, what I see as I'm not politician but energy analyst. What I see, the hesitation of the government to remove the subsidy because of the political risk. It will have, they will experience maybe the political risk if they remove subsidy. But to move to the net zero emission, as I said earlier, the first transition is transition from subsidized fossil energy to non-subsidized or to less subsidized. Subsidized, less subsidized, non-subsidized, tax fossil, and parallel with that, speed up renewable. Yeah, speed up renewable, meaning we have to provide incentives, more and more incentives. So if we tax fossil, my idea, use this money, tax fossil, use this fund to subsidize renewable. But in the past, what happened, renewable, yeah, this is the secret of our country, but maybe you heard, yeah, that in Indonesia, past regulation, renewable will be purchased, electricity from renewables, with 85% of the average cost, regional cost, meaning cheaper than fossil. So it didn't grow because it's cheaper than fossil, yeah? the set of the pricing. So so after we continue to decarbonize, decarbonization is a must. I agree with that. Decarbonization is a must. Speed up, make as much as possible electricity and energy from renewable. But I agree also, leadership is very important. And this leadership should be shared amongst all leaders worldwide. So they need also, I think leaders come to COP, but also maybe like G20, but I don't know how deep they discuss about this energy transition. I think they need also to be more knowledgeable and discuss, yeah, and now the reality. And I think it is very important to set the target, to set the net zero emission years based on the study, based on reality, based on the study, and after that, declare. But this time, what happened? Almost all leaders declare Indonesia will be net zero emission 2060. But let's see, do we have the study? We don't have the study. How much the financial impact? How much we have exercise? I have exercise. If we do this, we need, for my exercise, we need 2,000 billion US dollar. There's more than one, I think, what now our GDP, maybe 1,000, 1 trillion, yeah? 1 trillion US dollar. So we need 2 trillion US dollar. Because why? We have to replace fossil and we have to invest in the renewable infrastructure or nuclear power or renewable with storage. And that's already assumed that the storage cost will decrease from $200 per kilowatt hour to $50, my calculation. So with that, we need not 2,000, but 2 million, yeah, 2 million billion. I forgot the number, but yeah, quite huge number, yeah. I don't know whether I'm not with the paper, so not so accurate, but we can discuss later. So very huge number of very huge.
I want to go to Anna and Mia if we're using the terms from Dr. Herman Darnell from the perspective of the developed countries. What do you think the key variables that can support the low and middle income countries, the developing countries, the emerging countries, emerging economic countries? What are the key factors? What are the key variables that can support us for achieving that goal of net zero emission? What do you think? Maybe Anna first?
Yeah, thanks. I agree that leadership is really key, both in terms of developed countries, setting the right targets and pledges, and then also supporting developing countries to reach their NDCs and climate targets. but also within developing countries, that we also need to see change for accelerating renewable energy from the leadership. And I think it's important not to base our future ideas on what's happened in the past and how slow sort of the transition away from fossil fuels has been, or the increase of the increase of renewable energy in the past. And we need to realize that the acceleration and focus on how we can change that, and how both the government can do that and state-owned enterprises, and how really we can make that transition. And so, leadership at COP from all countries, including developed countries, and commitments in terms of financial and technology to support developing countries. And I really think that's key.
Thank you, Anna. Over to you, Mia. What do you think about the key factors of success in this?
Yes, thank you. When looking at some of the key factors of success, I think some of the panelists already mentioned some of them. I mean, for example, fossil fuel subsidies. I think this was a really important point to highlight. The important message here is that we're not seeing the true costs of fossil fuels, because most countries in the world are still subsidizing fossil fuels. And this is happening even currently in the European context, we've seen extremely high electricity costs. Electricity cost has gone up to 600 euros per megawatt hour. That's close to $1. So extremely high prices, and we see many governments that are rushing to also subsidize again energy prices, and so giving also subsidies directly to fossil fuels. So clearly there needs to be leadership from developed countries, from the G7 and the G20 to show that it is possible to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, and then we will see the true costs. And as we've seen, I mean, renewable energy is in most countries of the world already competitive with fossil alternatives. Now, of course, there is a question, when you get to higher penetration of renewable energy, then the question of storage and system integration comes into play, and that might lead also to higher costs. And that's why then it's important that developed countries step up also their contribution in terms of climate finance. I think that's something that is indeed still missing, and we're hoping that by COP27, there will be increased commitments of climate finance also from developed countries to show that really a transition to a 100% renewable energy-based system is possible. It is desirable from a societal perspective to combat climate change, but it is also cost effective and can meet, an important point that was discussed here is to meet the increasing demand of energy in developing countries particularly. So these are all very important points.
Thank you so much, Mia, for that. It is quite important for us to underline that there are hidden costs underlying in keep developing the fossil fuels. So we have a question from the audiences to all the panelists, including Anna and Mia, from George Florian Staisu. What is the opinion from all the panelists on the carbon offsetting option utilized by high polluting companies? In his opinion, carbon offsetting is just another form of window dressing or greenwashing that needs to be stopped, as it contributes to the current dramatic devastating climate change, heat waves, forest fires, drought, and floods, and compromises the achievement of UN SDGs and of the EU Green Deal objective. Maybe we can start from Ginny, maybe a quick round of answer.
Sure. I think carbon offsetting often is used as a narrative to allow fossil fuel expansion, and it, instead of talking about direct mitigation efforts, it does justify some of the gas expansion projects, and also there are fossil fuel companies in Korea, gas companies who are promising to plant more trees to offset carbon. But we need to. But it is very clear that the climate crisis is a very urgent issue, and the time that it takes for those trees to actually offset the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we're emitting, it does play into a greenwashing narrative.
Yes, Ginny. It's interesting that it is just justifying what the emitters are doing. What do you think about this, Dr. Aditya?
Yeah, I mean, carbon offsetting is like a permission, is like a permit for these companies to to keep on their business as usual activities, and by that I mean by if they're already producing high emissions in their activities, and they are provided with this kind of options to greenwash their activities, then yeah, I think it falls into that narrative. And but the carbon offsetting could be thought as a I mean, it's not for the long-term mitigation of climate. I mean, it could be for the short-term one, but for long mitigation, there needs to be a stringent measure to curb the emissions from these companies, or even to encourage these companies to decarbonize their activities in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. You mentioned that it's not a long-term solution for decarbonization. What do you think about it, Dr. Widyawan?
Yes, I think if it's done in the transaction, for example, you're selling LNG or you're selling oil, and then you offset and becoming a carbon neutral by doing something, in the absence of the cost of the price of carbon, then you wouldn't know what would be the appropriate, offset price of offset cost. So I think because we don't have the even the tax is not being implemented yet, and the tax is very, very low, like $2 per ton, right? So this is something which I think when if the transaction is done internally, for example, in Indonesia, it's their opportunity cost is what is the proposed tax in Indonesia to be implemented. But if this is involved the real purchasing of the carbons through the mechanism of the trading scheme or something like that with the cap and trade and so on and so forth, this could be an effective things. The problem is that they are basing the long-term problem with the carbon offset without saying that how much is going to be costing them. Because to me, as an economist, anything that you can actually deal with the transaction externalities of the fossil fuels, for example, this could actually give the right incentive to go into the right direction, and it could be a solution. But the key is the question on how much is actually the offsetting cost going to be, right? I mean, if you just said that our Indonesian forests or just by planting mangrove and stuff, you could actually compensate all the carbon emission, that's not good enough, right? You have to have the true cost of what is actually the carbon price is.
Thank you, Dr. Widyawan. We can see that as an opportunity cost for a potential for the carbon tax. What do you think about that, Dr. Herman Darnell?
Yeah, I think that's one of the idea to disincentive fossil. Yeah, and I agree. In general, I agree with the carbon offset. There are two possibilities for the carbon offset in supply side and in demand side. Maybe we can start in demand side for the large customers. They have to do. They have. We oblige them to pay all the carbon. So the carbon offset maybe encourage customer to use renewable, and if we do the carbon offset and they pay, So we should have such a mechanism for the use of the money. Like for Indonesia, if we do that, for instance, and the money goes to Ministry of Finance, but no use in the renewable energy, that maybe will not have the impact to the energy transition. But if we have the regulation that all the carbon offset, and if they pay their carbon and then the money goes to renewable energy development, that's meaning that will encourage, will increase the development of renewable. We support the funding for the renewable. And in the supply side, this is also good, but I think this must be very good, yeah. So meaning that all the carbon emission has been paid when you sell produce or sell fossil fuel. But this also maybe will be the burden of the economy in the developing countries, yeah, and underdeveloping countries. As Widyawan said, and I said, despite carbon offset in supply side, even the tax has not been applied. So we start with applied tax, and after that, carbon offset can be one of the means to reduce the emission in the supply side. But at the beginning, I think, yeah, for Indonesia, what is needed, first set the target of the emission intensity in the supply side. So for instance, like power utility, how much CO2 emission per megawatt hour, how ton CO2 emission per megawatt hour should be set. And this one of the indicators, they are going less carbon. But this time we haven't had that regulation. So like our power utility just continue without knowing whether they increase or not, whether they decrease or not their carbon. And also this, I think, a kind of sustainability action in large industry. In large industry, maybe we monitor their emission, and then we also set at least partially, not carbon offset, but like something like partial carbon offset. So some say we start maybe not 100% carbon they paid, but they at least, for instance, rather than nothing, so maybe they can pay, say we have the rate, yeah. For the beginning, we have, say, 15% or 20% of their carbon, they already paid. Those who, and we can have the, like the level, yeah. Those who paid maybe 20, up to 25, they have bronze, for instance. Up to 50, maybe, what else? Bronze and then silver, yeah. And we have gold, for instance, 400%, something like that. But I don't know, because this is, I just have the idea how to encourage energy consumers to reduce their carbon. But if we reduce if the consumer demand the clean energy, the energy provider will provide it. So it is good, yeah. If the energy consumer is obliged or is encouraged to consume more clean energy. So we have consumer side and also supply side, but supply side may be a bit harder.
Thank you, Dr. Herman Darnell, for that interesting idea of classifying the potential carbon offset for the energy consumers. Off to Mia, Mia. Can you please respond to the question?
Yes, thank you. I think, I mean, the question of offsets is problematic in many ways. You know, it's the same. I mean, when you look at countries, I mean, there used to be a strong narrative around offsetting, with developed countries being able to offset their emissions by, providing money to, developing countries. I think that has already changed. And now, instead of, talking about developed countries, offsetting their emissions, instead what we have is all countries in the world need to reduce their emissions, but developed countries need to provide finance to developing countries to help them in the transition. And I think the same, applies, the same principle should apply to companies as well. It's important, we need to decrease emissions. We need to have greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and we need to reach net zero emissions by mid-century. So in this context, it's important that all actors, governments, but also companies, reduce their own emissions. And then something that some of my colleagues have worked on more is this idea of a contribution claim. So instead of claiming that companies offset their emissions, that they would contribute, provide money to support a green and decarbonized transition. Another problem with offsets is that they're typically, a lot of the offsets happen with, forestry. And the problem we've seen increasingly, dramatic forest fires also. So the permanence of those offsets is also not guaranteed. So it is problematic. You might not actually see the impact and the emissions reduced that you were hoping. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Anna, you can answer that.
Yeah, I think focusing on offsets is a greenwashing tactic used by companies to remove the focus from making real emissions reductions. And it's quite problematic, and there is a limit to carbon storage. So sequestration of really reflects the loss of carbon in the past, and so it's quite a difficult it is quite difficult in terms of measuring how effective really it can be. And I think you get these trading schemes that are often very flawed, and it really needs to be done the right way, because you have this problem of additionality where you can get credited for carbon offsets when really there would have the project would have gone ahead anyway. For example, the forest was going to be expanded anyway, or not be cut down, and this is a problem we're seeing in Australia, where the scheme in place just really isn't working. And so, companies continue with their emissions, and they, argue they're offsetting it, and really nothing is happening. And then compounded on that, you've got low biodiversity value in a lot of these offset projects. You've got issues with maladaptation and food security issues. You've got, if you look at projects across the world, you've got displacement of indigenous populations. It goes on and on and on. And so really, if we're going to use offsets, we need to focus on real emissions reductions first. And then if we're looking at offsets, we need a scheme and a trading scheme in place where, it's really held accountable whether, there is the sequestration and that everything's sort of in place, that it makes a difference there. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your answer. It is interesting that it is needed to be done several steps and several preparation before going to implement the offset. I'm really sorry that we passed the time, but a last question, maybe a quick answer from Agung Tanu Dwijoyo to Pak Wawan and Dr. Herman Darnell. You both mentioned that we still need gas in Indonesia. We've seen that coal is being left behind and coal assets face huge risk being stranded. Having this example, do you see the similar thing will happen to gas if it's implemented in Indonesia? If yes, isn't it better to not rely on gas, even though it is a feasible solution in the short term to provide electricity security for Indonesia? What do you think, Dr. Widiawan and Dr. Herman Darnell, about it?
Well, I think on the planning side, I mentioned earlier of the reliance on CCS, and applying CCS to gas is easier than applying it to the coal, right? And it's probably cheaper. But again, it is going to be tested. But that is actually in the thinking, right? So if actually, perhaps it's a big if, but if the CCS, it could be applied, then the gas is one of the solutions. We all know that the upstream oil and gas on the production side, CCS is already being implemented. For example, for BP Tangguh is already undergoing. And then for the future projects such as Abadi Masela, it will have to also apply the CCUS rather than CCS, but CCUS on that side. But I think on the downstream side will probably a bit more difficult, at least in the short period of time. But I think we don't have much options, as Herman Daniel earlier said. What can we do if we are facing down coal and we cannot use gas? I mean, gas we have, and then it actually benefiting also the country for the developing their own resources, and then we build infrastructure, create employment, and so on. And then we are going to be not too much dependent, as we are a big net oil importer, because we do have the gas. If developed properly, we could be self-sufficient actually. So that's a lot of benefits of using gas, but of course from the emission point of view, without the CCS, I don't know whether that is going to be consistent with our plan to be still at zero emission by 2060. On paper it is, but I don't know how it's going to be in reality down the road.
Halo?
Yeah, please, Dr. Herman.
Langsung aja ya.
Yes.
So since Pak Agung asked, so I will respond in bahasa ya, in bahasa. Jadi tentang gas phase out ini sebenarnya kalau saya lihat ya, yang inti sebenarnya baik coal phase out maupun gas phase out, kita benar-benar ini kebijakan besar. Jadi harus benar-benar distudi kalau kita memang mau mengimplementasikan. Tapi as the statement to encourage atau statement untuk mendorong transisi, saya kira itu oke, statement politis ya. Tapi sebagai rencana, coal phase out, gas phase out, itu harus dihitung. Kaitan pertama adalah terkait dengan security of supply, seperti di Jawa. Di Jawa itu kalau kita phase out coal, phase out gas, paling tinggi kita punya hanya dari geothermal, saya ulangi lagi, dan dari hydro, mungkin nggak nyampe 40. 40 itu udah saya hitung tuh geothermal yang belum di ini gitu loh. Belum ya kira-kira 40 itulah, 40 terawatt hour. Bagaimana kita mau masuk sisanya? Mau bangun nuklir di mana letaknya? Berapa banyak? Kalau nggak mau nuklir, berarti kita harus pakai solar energy. Pilihannya itu, solar energy berarti dengan storage. Jadi ada isu mahal, ada isu tidak secure. Itu yang akan terjadi kalau kita juga phase out mau phase out gas juga setelah coal gitu loh. Saya tetap melihatnya sebenarnya bagi kita Indonesia, mari dulu kita speed up. Saya nggak menggunakan akselerasi, karena akselerasi itu digunakan kalau kita udah lari cepat baru akselerasi. Kita belum lari cepat, jadi kita speed up dulu. Jadi dari bergerak kita speed up, dari slow menjadi agak cepat ya. Walaupun itu istilahnya akselerasi, tapi akselerasi itu terlalu ekstrim. Nah, kita speed up renewable, kita lihat, di samping itu kita studi benar. Saya kira statement-statement untuk mengencourage energy transition, bahwa kita juga mau phase out coal, itu boleh saja. Tapi the real phase out, kita harus lakukan studi, karena itu dampaknya sangat besar ya. Dampak terutamanya terhadap supply security di Jawa. Dan di samping itu, tentang gas tadi yang ditanya, menurut saya gas ini yang kita hati-hati. Kalau negara maju juga sedang bergerak transisi ke gas dari coal-nya, mereka kan juga sebenarnya mau dekarbonisasi karena mereka sudah zero growth ya. Zero growth berarti dia udah emisi puncak. Kalau udah emisi puncak, dia mau phase out energi fosil. Dia phase out coal, dia transisi ke gas. Sebenarnya maksudnya itu. Sekarang kayaknya yang bunyi di Eropa misalnya ke gas dan nuklir. Dari coal ke gas dan nuklir. Jadi nggak terlalu cepat. Mungkin nggak 2050. Mungkin agak telat juga gitu loh. Karena apa? Ternyata bangun orang semua, begitu suplai gas saja terganggu, ternyata ada yang berpikir malah balik ke coal juga di barat itu kan gitu. Yang tadinya sudah menyatakan seperti Perancis sudah menyatakan mau mengurangi produksi nuklir dari 75 ke 50%, balik lagi presidennya kampanye lagi bahwa kita perlu nuklir lagi gitu loh. Nah, mungkin juga di Jerman. Nah, nuklir juga akan ada isu lain, isu security ya, isu juga banyaklah isu-isu yang tentu juga ini bagi Indonesia juga kita belum mulai sama sekali, belum ada kan. Nah, jadi yang perlu kita pertimbangkan kalau kita phase out gas, itu sebenarnya gas supply-nya itu akan berapa harganya di masa depan. Kalau kita bisa long term kontrak, boleh. Kalau kita membangun ya. Tetapi memang tidak ada, seperti Pak Widiawan juga bilang, tidak ada solusi, saya juga sependapat dengan itu, kalau coal phase out, kalau nggak ke gas dulu tuh nggak ada solusi, belum ada. Kita nggak bisa juga jumping up ke nuklir. Di paling cepat bangun nuklir juga mungkin kalau kita dari 0, 15 tahun, nggak bisa jumping up. Jadi solusinya kita perlu gas dulu, namun gas ini ada tantangannya juga. Kalau kita amankan pasokannya, mungkin pasokan lokal kita bisa kita utamakan, kontrak long term, dan kalau tidak, tentu ini juga akan menjadi isu dari security of supply di masa depan terkait dengan harga dari gasnya, kalau tidak kita amankan. Jadi, security itu kan isunya keberadaan supply dan harga supply. Ya, apakah supply-nya ada, apakah harganya tidak mahal. Kalau jadi mahal, dia akan insecure. Kalau tidak ada, dia insecure gitu loh. Jadi, saran saya kalau Indonesia memang... Oke, kita lihat dulu 10 tahun ke depan. Yang tadi disebut oleh Pak, siapa yang di tengah? ya, senyum nih. Saya kok tadi lupa namanya. Sorry ya. Karena baru lihat tadi di daftar. Jadi gini, walaupun RUPTL kita itu sudah lebih banyak renewable, tapi in term of energy sampai 2030, saya hitung tuh hanya sekitar 30%. Jadi 50%-an lebih powernya, dayanya, tapi karena itu ada solar, ada hydro yang capacity faktornya lebih kecil, jadi dari energi untuk listrik itu masih 70% tambahan ini dari fosil, dan hanya 30-an% dari renewable. Itu case menuju 2030 yang sudah ada RUPTL gitu lah. Nah, sesudah itu kita masih akan tumbuh yang sekitar juga dari 2030 ke 2040 itu paling nggak 300-400 terawatt hour lagi. Dari mana itu sumbernya? Nah, inilah yang perlu studi, baik oleh perguruan tinggi, oleh juga lembaga-lembaga, IESR dan sebagainya, karena begitu kita putuskan phase out dan itu implementasi, itu akan berat. Jadi saya mungkin untuk mengakhiri, statement phase out, itu untuk encouragement, bukan untuk implementasi. Kalau implementasi, harus studi dulu. Demikian.
Thank you so much, Dr. Herman Darnell, for that answer to the question from the audience. Maybe a little bit also answering that for the audiences here, also to all the panelists and the presenters. The Institute for Essential Services Reform has just launched the Financing Indonesia's Coal Phase Out. What just Dr. Herman Darnell mentioned about, this is the study being written by Dr. Aditya and his team in the IASR. Maybe if you guys wants to see furthermore about the coal phase out and how to finance it, we can see it from there. But thank you so much for all the panelists as well, all to the presenters. Unfortunately, our time has ended in this very interesting and lively discussion. But before ending today's session, let me recap today's discussion for all the attendees. The first one, the symptoms that comes to the surface lately has given us a clear understanding that the ongoing energy crisis happening in the world is actually a fossil energy crisis. This once again shows how urgent energy transition is. And in any way possible, the plan to phase out fossil fuels must be happening anytime soon in order to achieve the climate goals. The current global rush on developing natural gas and its infrastructure can lead into another potential dispute that can hinder the process of energy transition. Events such as early retirement and stranded assets of the infrastructure are foreseen to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And it also requires studies. This for sure is a waste of time, and today's discussion has helped us to learn from our experience in a very difficult effort to retire coal. Although in several countries, such as developing countries and low mid-income countries, to really implement clean energy is quite challenging, to go further in working on the key factors that can support the effort of energy transition in general is an agenda that needed to be done as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the end of today's webinar. We would like to thank our speakers and panelists for their exceptional presentation and fruitful discussion on the current condition of the global energy crisis and the dilemma of gas as a transition fuel. Lastly, I would like to apologize for any inconvenience or lack of words that happened throughout the webinar. We would also like to thank you, every participant today, for joining in the discussion with our panelists and speakers. We hope to see you in the next opportunities. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.